Good evening, and welcome to this, the special edition of the Livermore City Council for February 29th, Leap Day. So I now call the meeting to order. Let the roll show that all members are present and accounted for, with the exception of Councilmember Lorraine Turner, who is excused tonight. I ask that you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, because this is a special meeting, there is no citizens forum. We're going to go directly into the staff presentation for matters for consideration, and then after we hear the staff presentation, then we will take public comment. So just reordering the agenda, but this is going to be the discussion and direction regarding the Isabel neighborhood plan and the update on the BART to Livermore extension project. So with that, Mr. Kiefer.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the Council. My name is Stephen Kiefer. I'm the city's Community and Economic Development Director. The agenda for this evening is dedicated to a presentation and discussion of the Isabel Neighborhood Land Use Plan. The plan encompasses the area surrounding the proposed Isabel BART station. The Isabel extension, or Isabel station, will serve as the first phase of a planned ultimate extension to Greenville Road along the freeway median, with a direct connection to the Altamont Commuter Express line. While BART is proceeding with drafting an environmental impact report for the extension, the city will be moving forward in parallel with development of a neighborhood plan. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to present neighborhood plan alternatives and seek council direction. Tonight's presentation will be provided by the city's project team, which consists of Assistant City Engineer Bob Vinn, Associate Planner Lori Parks, and Principal Planner Steve Riley. We also have Diet and Bache present, which is the city's consultant regarding the neighborhood plan, and there are also staff members from BART's project team available. Although the primary focus tonight is on the neighborhood plan, staff will begin with a brief history and status update of the BART extension. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Vinn.
Thank you, Steve. So BART to Livermore has had a long history, starting back in the 1960s. Since the initial construction of the BART system, there's been several studies on Tri-Valley extensions. In the 1980s, BART was planning the Dublin-Pleasanton extension, and they also purchased land at 580 in Isabel and at 580 in the vicinity of Laughlin and Greenville roads for future station sites and a yard site. In the late 80s, or I'm sorry, in 1998, the Dublin-Pleasanton line opened for service. More recently, in 2010, the city and BART partnered on a program-level environmental impact report that looked at 10 different alignment alternatives and 5 different station sites. In 2011, in response to the Keep BART on I-580 initiative, the City Council adopted general plan policy to advocate for a 580 alignment to Isabel Avenue with a future extension to Greenville Road along I-580. So there's the 2 phases of the project. Now the exact station site for the Greenville Road hasn't been determined. That will be subject of a future study right now, where this project is about phase 1, BART to Isabel. So BART to Isabel doesn't preclude a future extension to Greenville, and the city's general plan does not include any stations in downtown. So BART is currently working on environmental study of a 4.8-mile extension in the middle of the freeway of 580 to a station just to the east of Isabel Avenue. The freeway will be widened to make room for BART in the median. We will not be losing any freeway lanes, but the lanes will be rebuilt to the outside. The project includes connecting bus services to destinations in Livermore, such as downtown, the labs, the ACE station, and Las Positas College. The project also includes parking facilities and access improvements. And the project includes tail tracks for storing train cars and performing light maintenance. BART is looking at a number of alternative sites for tail tracks both in and outside of the freeway median. As required by law, BART is looking at a number of alternatives to the full BART train. They're looking at another rail option called diesel multiple units, or DMUs, and this is similar to the BART extension that's being deployed in the Highway 4 corridor to Antioch. The DMU alternative would need a full maintenance yard, and BART is exploring a number of alternative sites to locate that maintenance yard. And like with the full BART alternative, the DMU alternative would have connecting bus services to its destinations in Livermore. BART is also looking at 2 bus alternatives. The express bus rapid transit alternative would have direct ramps to the Dublin Pleasanton BART station and would provide faster bus service to the Dublin Pleasanton station than we have today from various locations in the city. And they're also looking at a lower cost enhanced bus service, which is basically beefing up the service we have today. So BART's schedule, they plan on releasing a draft environmental impact report for public review in early 2017, with consideration by the BART board in the fall of 2017. So there's a number of steps after the BART board takes action on the project that you can see there, and we can have revenue service as soon as 2025. So for this very important regional project to connect BART to ACE provides a number of benefits to the city. It would improve access to jobs and provide transit options for Livermore residents and businesses. It would have environmental benefits, reducing vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas, and other air pollutants, and would also reduce energy usage. And it provides an opportunity for transit-oriented development, which supports local goals of the city for focusing growth in strategic locations, providing housing types in short supply in the community, and providing a place for high-wage jobs. So with that, I will turn it over to Lori to talk about the Isabel Neighborhood Plan.
Thank you. So concurrently, the city is developing the Isabel Neighborhood Plan to guide future development in the area surrounding the proposed station. The planning area is shown in the red outline here. It covers approximately 1,100 acres in the northwest corner of the city and includes Las Positas College and Cayetano Park. Oops, that's not working. The entire planning area is within the city's adopted urban growth boundary. And the yellow circle here represents the half-mile radius around the station. This is considered a reasonable walking distance to rail stations and is the focus area of the planning effort. The neighborhood plan will ultimately include these elements, which will collectively establish a new framework for the station area. In legal terms, it will function as a specific plan, which has been an effective tool for guiding development in focused areas of the city. Examples are the Downtown Specific Plan and the South Livermore Valley Specific Plan. In addition, the neighborhood plan will meet requirements for station area planning. Specifically, BART will take the neighborhood plan into account when making their decision on the BART to Livermore extension project. They will evaluate the project against their system expansion criteria, which calls for land uses and features that support BART ridership. Next, in order to obtain funding administered by MTC, the BART to Livermore project would need to be included in the regional transportation plan. To qualify for inclusion in the RTP, there needs to be a minimum amount of housing existing or planned within a half mile of the proposed station, in accordance with MTC's policy for transit-oriented development. MTC will also evaluate the extension project and rank it against other projects applying for funding in the region, prioritizing those that score highest. So the RTP is updated every 4 years and is now part of Plan Bay Area. Just to note also, the the neighborhood plan is based on the extension of full BART service, and the city would need to revisit the plan if the BART board ultimately decided to implement one of the alternatives. So here's an overview of the schedule. Staff has completed the first phase of the planning process and has developed 3 alternative scenarios that I will present shortly. Based on council direction tonight, staff will refine these concepts into one plan. City Council consideration of the plan is anticipated for early 2017. So the first phase of the planning process included an analysis of existing conditions and future market conditions. So as you can see on this aerial, there's a lot of vacant land in the planning area. This is an opportunity to create much of the neighborhood from the ground up. There are also constraints related to the airport, freeway, topography, and the creeks flowing through the area. The preliminary market analysis conducted by the consultant team concluded that there is currently strong demand for multifamily residential development, although new office development is a longer-term opportunity. Existing and new uses will drive demand for new neighborhood-serving retail uses. So the first phase of the planning process also included community engagement to establish a vision for the neighborhood. Outreach involved over about 40 events, including focus groups, interviews with key property owners, neighborhood meetings, tables at citywide events, and presentations to community groups. So since starting this process, the project team has directly talked to about 800 people representing a wide range of stakeholder groups, most of which are listed here. Staff also conducted a survey in 2015, asking people about their priorities for the BART to Livermore project. Staff received over 2,100 responses by mail and online. The results affirm strong support for the extension, with 83% checking that bringing BART to Livermore is important to them. So while the vast majority of community members support the project overall, staff also heard some concerns to consider, as listed here. Staff has begun to address these issues and will continue to analyze them throughout the planning process. This includes preparing an environmental impact report to evaluate potential impacts of the new development. From this, staff will identify mitigation measures and policies to include in the neighborhood plan. Staff refined the initial objectives of the plan to reflect the community feedback. First, staff has heard from people that live and work in the planning area that they would like to see improvements and more amenities. The plan should help create a vibrant neighborhood while addressing their concerns. Second, the plan is a major opportunity to address citywide goals for increasing transportation options and to complement the range of housing and employment choices that currently exist in Livermore. For example, the BART extension would help create a market for Class A office space. Supporting transit ridership relates to these goals, as well as to the criteria that will be used to evaluate the BART to Livermore project. In addition to the overall objectives, 6 key themes came out of the initial outreach process. Each theme has guiding principles that together form a vision for the neighborhood. First is the desire for a mix of land uses that together create a vibrant neighborhood. This means that residents and workers have easy access to everyday services, and a variety of housing types help address existing needs and preferences in the community. There should be enough development and activity in the neighborhood to support a small format grocery store and make a retail center viable. Locally, this would be something between a Trader Joe's and Nob Hill when we say small format. So the neighborhood should also be easy to get around by walking and biking. The pedestrian and bike network should provide safe and convenient access between the BART station, residential areas, and destinations within the planning area, including the college and Cayetano Park. The natural landscape of the planning area should be highlighted through features like creekside trails and parks. The street layout and buildings design should be The architecture and streetscape should reflect Livermore's unique identity and create a sense of character for the neighborhood. Similar to Livermore's downtown, the center of the neighborhood should be oriented towards pedestrians. The neighborhood should provide opportunities for people to hang out. A retail center would create a focal point for the neighborhood, while specific developments should also integrate shared spaces, such as courtyards. So the last theme is compatibility with existing uses. This means that new development should be sensitive to adjacent residential areas and should support the area's existing assets. The Isabel neighborhood should not compete with downtown Livermore as a regional destination, but should draw upon its successful characteristics in creating a neighborhood center for this part of the city. In addition to the vision for the neighborhood, the community outreach resulted in specific objectives related to the BART station. These relate to concerns over sufficient station parking, public safety, design, and the potential for spillover parking and traffic congestion. Staff has worked with our consultants to develop 3 scenarios that incorporate the neighborhood vision in different ways. To achieve the vision and meet the plan's objectives, each alternative accommodates a similar amount of development, shown here. This would be enough development to make a retail center viable, provide gathering spaces, and create a walkable neighborhood. It also implements local policies for accommodating a variety of housing types and focusing growth in strategic locations. This level would help the BART to Livermore project qualify and compete for transportation funding. It is consistent with future market projections while allowing some flexibility for specialty uses and for adapting to changing conditions. Development would be expected to occur over a 20 to 25 year period. So with that, the diagrams for each of the alternatives show new land uses in solid colors. Existing land uses are assumed to remain where no solid color is shown. Commercial land use types are shown in purple, pinks, and red, while the 4 residential designations are shown in yellows and browns. So the residential categories are based on housing types. The neighborhood transition and village categories would be mainly 2 to 3 stories and resemble the existing townhome and multifamily development in the area. Neighborhood center and core housing would typically consist of 4 to 5 story condominium or apartment buildings. These photos show examples of each type to provide a general sense of the scale. 3 of the examples are from Livermore, including Shea Montage, which is within the planning area. Also, the BART station configuration is the same on each diagram, as these elements will be part of the BART project. The current plan for station design includes a platform in the median, a parking structure on both sides, a parking structure on the south side of the freeway, and a pedestrian bridge connecting to both sides. The city is encouraging BART to include at least 3,000 parking spaces in the structure. This would be among the most of all BART stations in the system. Staff is also exploring additional parking options. Bus stops would be integrated with the street network on the north side of the station. So on each of the alternatives, neighborhood serving commercial uses are located along Isabel Avenue in a central visible location. Office uses are located along the freeway to buffer new residential uses. The transition and village housing types are located around the edges, while the center and core housing types are located in the middle of the neighborhood closest to the BART station. Each of the diagrams also shows open space buffers along creeks, at least 1 new neighborhood park, and an interconnected pathway network. Okay. All right, so the first alternative is called Main Street. In this alternative, the retail center is located on the west side of Isabel along a main street that runs through the neighborhood. There's a delay here. Contiguous blocks of offices containing incubator spaces and shared amenities form a tech hub where new businesses benefit from the proximity of the BART station. A new neighborhood park is centrally located to the new businesses and residences. So the second alternative is called Two Centers. In this one, there are two retail centers located on either side of the freeway. The main one is located on the north side. A smaller cluster is located on the south side to provide more convenient and walkable access to retail for new and existing residents on that side of the freeway. Office uses are spread throughout the neighborhood rather than concentrated in one hub. Also in Alternative 2, 3 small parks serve the neighborhood, including a small park on the south side and the approximate location of the existing pumpkin patch. A new pedestrians and bicycle bridge over I-580 at Collier Canyon Creek creates a continuous pathway loop around the neighborhood. So in Alternative 3, the neighborhood center is focused on the east side of Isabel Avenue with ground floor retail spaces lining the streets linking to the BART station. Streets are oriented roughly parallel to Independence Drive, which is intended to create view corridors. Did it freeze? Okay. Sorry. So this alternative shows 2 new parks. And like Alternative 2, there is a continuous pathway loop that spans the freeway using pedestrian bridges over I-580. So to provide additional context on the scale, the area envisioned for most of the new development covers roughly the same area as the core part of downtown, from Maple to N Street, Railroad Avenue to 4th Street. The block sizes in the Isabel neighborhood would be similar to downtown, creating a more walkable scale than what currently exists in the planning area. So staff conducted public outreach to get feedback on the alternatives. This included meetings, presentations to the city's advisory bodies, 3 public workshops, an open house, and an online survey. About 130 people attended the citywide workshop on November 12th. Staff received just over 1,000 responses to the online survey. And 84% of these respondents indicated that they had not attended an outreach event, meaning that most of them were new participants to the process. So, based on community outreach for the alternatives, there continues to be overall support for the BART to Livermore project. The most popular theme of the neighborhood vision is to create, is related to open space, although there is strong support for all aspects. When asked what is missing from the vision, which was question 2 of the online survey, the majority of written comments reflected concerns about parking, traffic, and public safety. Less than 2% of respondents wrote in that they do not want BART to Livermore under that question. So, Alternative 1 has emerged as the overall preference, especially in terms of the street network and land use mix. Some community members have expressed concerns about the overall level of new development, and these are mainly related to parking, traffic on local streets, demand for public services, and the scale and character of the residential development. Other participants have expressed excitement about the housing opportunities and additional amenities. The new pedestrian bridge over I-580 and the 3 neighborhood parks shown in Alternative 2 are the most popular features in terms of open space and trail connections. So several property owners have submitted requests for consideration, included as attachment 7 of your staff report. These are related to the land use designations and development standards that would apply to their sites. So staff is carefully evaluating these requests and will make a recommendation at the preferred plan stage based on the general direction from council. So next, Steve will summarize the relationship to the general plan.
Thank you, Lori, and good evening, Mayor Marchand and members of the City Council. As Lori mentioned, the BART Extension Neighborhood Plan represents a major opportunity to implement general plan policies. The general plan calls for development of mixed-use, higher-density neighborhoods close to mass transit. It also includes policies for providing a variety of housing types, job opportunities, and transportation options. The preliminary analysis of general plan growth assumptions finds that there is sufficient capacity under the current general plan to accommodate 4,225 new units and 10,270 jobs in the Isabel neighborhood plan area. Projections indicate that Livermore will reach 40,000 residential units around 2040. That's general plan build-out, based on historic trends in economic growth. Here is a diagram showing the number of residential building permits per year from 1980 through 2015. Dark blue shows single-family residential units, and red shows the multifamily residential units. As you can see, the trend lines are going down from the peak in the 80s and 90s for growth in Livermore, and the last couple years, 2015 and 2014, 13, and 12, where we had just around 200 residential units being built every year. The General Plan Growth Management Policy administered through the Housing Implementation Program allows for 140 to 700 new dwelling units annually. This represents 0.5 to 2.5 of the 2002 housing unit count. This range is not proposed to be increased to accommodate the Isabel neighborhood plan. For reference, the actual housing growth rate as a share of 2002 housing units ranged from 0.3% to 0.8% over the last 10 years, which again is reflected on this chart. The residential development envisioned for the Isabel neighborhood plan would occur over the next 25 years. We are increasingly an older community and losing our young people at a very high rate. For example, the red section of the bar shows that in 1980, 29% of the population was 18 to 34 years old, also known as millennials. But over the last 30 years, that rate has dropped to 20% in 2010, and the more recent data shows that trend is continuing. Housing affordability and a variety of housing types is one of the primary barriers for young people to stay in Livermore. Communities with these types of amenities listed on the slide are attractive to millennials, and this is what the Isabel neighborhood plan can provide. Retaining and attracting millennials are important because they help to sustain a vibrant, diverse community. They help run local businesses with their parents. They are entrepreneurs that start local businesses. Members of iGate are a great example. They are the ones starting families. But we want them to do that here in Livermore and not in other more affordable metropolitan regions around the country. In addition, it's not just millennials. Baby boomers and Gen Xers on the older end of the scale also desire to have smaller housing units, have options to go to services where they do not have to drive, and also would like to be near mass transit. Not everybody, but a variety of folks have told us they would also like that opportunity to stay and live more as they get older and would like to have a smaller unit and not have to take care of a big house or a yard anymore. While the plan helps implement many general plan policies, there are two that are in conflict with this vision. First, the city's Scenic Corridor policy effectively limits building heights along I-580 in order to promote views of the hillsides from the freeway. There is an exemption to the policy for any development within 1,000 feet of the Isabel Avenue north of the I-580 interchange, as shown in this darker circle here. That's an existing exemption for the Isabel interchange. Increasing the area covered by this exemption would be required to support new development under the Isabel neighborhood plan. For reference, the city limits span over 8 miles of I-580. Based on the alternatives, new development would span less than 1 mile when viewed from the freeway. Our exception to the Scenic Corridor would be the blue circle here, and here's the existing exemption. The second constraining policy is the airport protection area. The city designated the airport protection area in 1991 to encourage noise-compatible land use in the vicinity of the Livermore Municipal Airport. Currently, no new residential uses are allowed within the APA boundary. An amendment would be required to allow new residential development in the northeast corner of the APA, as represented by the dark blue square in the corner. While the APA has been a useful tool for promoting compatibility over time, the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan adopted in 2012 reflects current aviation standards and updated information. The Isabel Neighborhood Plan is being developed to be consistent with these land use provisions. For example, most of the planning area, including lands north of the freeway, is located within Safety Zone 6, which allows residential land uses. Safety Zone 6 is represented by the light yellow color. In addition, the areas envisioned for new residential development under the alternatives are also outside of the airport's projected year 2030 noise contours. The freeway is and will continue to be the dominant noise source for the area. Compatibility with airport operations and consistency with the airport plans will be evaluated in more detail during the next phase of the planning process. Based on preliminary analysis, staff anticipates recommending modifications to the airport protection area boundary to exclude the northeastern corner. I'm going to pass it back to Lori to finish the presentation.
All right, so staff is seeking direction from the City Council for the development of a preferred plan. Staff developed recommendations to guide your discussion based on community feedback. The Planning Commission unanimously concurred with these recommendations. The first recommendation is to carry forward the overall level of development reflected in the alternatives. This level is important for achieving the ultimate vision for a vibrant neighborhood that supports a grocery store and takes full advantage of regional rail access. The next recommendation is to use Alternative 1, the Main Street alternative, as the basis for the preferred plan. This was the most popular alternative during outreach. Recommended adjustments to Alternative 1 include incorporating the pedestrian bridge over I-580 at Collier Canyon Creek and 3 neighborhood parks based on Alternative 2. Exploring the potential for a new street connection to Sutter Street responds to feedback to provide station access while reducing the potential for cut-through traffic and spillover parking. A new land use category for the BART-owned sites is intended to allow for a mix of complementary transit-oriented uses. As part of the preferred plan, the key policy framework should focus on station parking, potential improvements to the transportation network, demand for public services such as water and schools, and design standards and guidelines. The key themes related to design that we heard through the outreach are listed here. These focus on compatibility with existing and adjacent uses and retaining Livermore's unique character. Lastly, staff will continue working with property owners to ensure their requests are considered. So that concludes our presentation. Staff and our consultant team are available for questions.
Very good. Thank you very much. A lot of information, a lot of ground covered there. Questions for staff at this point? Questions? Vice Mayor?
Just a couple of questions. In the community outreach meetings, was any kind of a presentation made on the impacts to the Scenic Corridor? Height board, scale drawing, story pole, photograph, something to say this is what the impact means.
We made the community aware that we would need to make Scenic Corridor modifications, but we did not show them specific visuals of what it would look like.
And under discussion later tonight, after we listen to the public, I didn't see in staff's presentation tonight what are the alternatives or the mitigations to the Scenic Corridor impact. So you've said the Scenic Corridor will be impacted. Are you prepared to discuss what's left of it and what it means if it's impacted to that degree?
The plan is to, once we get direction on the key elements of a preferred plan, is to go and do Scenic Corridor visual simulations to present back to the community and to the council in the spring.
So much like you've seen when you've adjusted the Scenic Corridor before. As you saw the diagram on the Scenic Corridor has been adjusted more than a dozen times during its existence. And so each time we do an analysis of sort of the existing condition, what would happen after the adjustment. We show the area that is being adjusted, and we show it in context, both east and west of the area being adjusted. So those simulations will be developed assuming we get direction on a preferred alternative, because we have to first know what we're sort of constructing, because you'll remember our process is to essentially build a hypothetical project showing what would happen. So once we get direction and you tell us what you'd like us to build, then we'll go out and do simulations on that. We'll get feedback from the community, and then you all will give us direction on that.
Last question. And does staff have numbers on what would be built in terms of density and height within the current general plan and the Scenic Corridor ordinance? So in other words, we're meeting BART and regional transportation funding density walkable community goals, which is admirable. They've asked us to hit that target. You've presented that design. As an alternative universe, has any effort gone into, but for not the regional mandates, what would Livermore's criteria have developed in terms of a neighborhood?
So currently our criteria is incompatible with creating a neighborhood. So there would be no neighborhood. You would end up with a business park as you have out there. That's compatible with your existing APA policies and your existing Scenic Corridor policies. You could not add any substantive residential at all, and you couldn't add any height on your industrial or office that you have out there now. So essentially a great way to think about it is the residential which is under construction would be your residential, and the heights of the buildings that are out there now for your industrial, you'd have more of that. So basically single story, single use industrial with large parking areas around it. That's essentially consistent with your existing policies. What you saw tonight obviously would require you to adjust those policies if you actually want to create a
That makes the compare and contrast really clear, and I just wanted to, it's not always said on page 2 of the staff report what the alternative trade-off is. Thank you.
There we go. A couple questions. Let's see. We talked about the visual simulations. So the 25 to 27, 2025 to 2027 date that they're talking about construction. I think we've had like 8 to 10 years of environmental work on this already. Is that pretty much, why that long? I keep getting people asking me that.
Well, a couple of reasons. One is the state and the federal environmental processes are being done sequentially rather than in parallel. And then there's just a lot of other work that needs to be done, design, right-of-way acquisition, before construction can start. And then construction itself is going to take a minimum of 3 years and perhaps, a few years longer. There is a possibility of accelerating the schedule if we could do the environmental processes in parallel, and if we could perhaps do some alternative project delivery strategies, such as a design-build contract that might consolidate some of the steps.
Okay, great, thank you. You answered the question about the grocery store. Let's see. It talked about peak elevation of buildings. So when they were talking about, they were I think 547 feet, which of course is not the height of the building, but the height of the elevation. So how does that translate to building height?
The peak elevation height that was mentioned by one of the landowners in the attached letter to the packet is the peak elevation height allowed by the FAA under Part 77. So that buildings that are at that elevation or below do not have to be reviewed by FAA.
Okay.
But if they are above that elevation, they need to be reviewed by the FAA.
Okay, but that isn't, that's not a city design criteria.
It is not.
So nobody's going to put in like a 100-foot tall building or?
No, that is just sort of an outside limit of how high it could be before FAA needs to review it. However, we have our own zoning standards and scenic corridor policies in place that limit the heights of the buildings to something much less than 100 feet.
Okay, yeah, 'cause I remember there was one applicant on one project that was talking about a two-story building, but in fact the two-story building was 55 feet tall, which is an unusual two-story building, but that's what that was. Does anybody have a sense of what the percentage of people that are parking in the BART parking lot in Pleasanton? What percentage are from Livermore? What percentage are actually from Pleasanton? And what percentage are actually coming from over the Altamont?
Well, yes, we have some data that's a little bit dated. It's from 2008. I got from BART.
Okay.
BART said they're in the process of updating that data. In about a month, they'll have something more current. At Dublin Pleasanton, the vast majority of people riding live in the Tri-Valley. The amount of people that were not in the Tri-Valley was about 15%.
Right, should I just read off the numbers?
Actually, I have the numbers right here. I was going to read them off earlier if you want them. It's from the BART 2008 parking study. It was one of the points I was going to bring up. City of home origin, Pleasanton 29%, Dublin 21%, San Ramon 17%. So that's well over half from that side of 580. Livermore at 15%, Tracy at 4%, and other at 13%. So it's quite an amazing number when you think about half of the people parking at BART are from Dublin, Pleasanton, and then you throw in San Ramon, it bumps it over half, according to the survey. So I mean, this isn't
that's a good
I don't think
thing.
it was a license plate survey at the time. It was a oral survey at the station. So. Anyway.
Okay. Well, good. No, that's very good. Because, of course, the economy has radically changed since 2008. And the statistic that we have that the 28% of the cars going over the Altamont ultimately are ending up in Silicon Valley. So there's some tremendous potential for ridership hopping on at the Livermore BART station and carrying on through to Silicon Valley. So, okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any other questions for staff? Okay, I've got some cards. We'll go into the hearing. Let me just get back to my place here. And more cards. All right. We have David Best, Elizabeth Cobb, and Jeannie Haig. Mr. Best.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Didn't know I was going to get to be the opening act, but
You get here first. You got your card on top.
Appreciate being the card on the top. I got here last, actually, I think. But anyway, as a lot of you know, I'm Dave Best. I work for Shea Homes. We're doing the residential development that's going on right now north of Interstate 580 in this planning area or future planning area. And we've been following along with the BART saga for quite a number of years now, attending all of the outreach meetings, and it's been really good stuff. And I just wanted to mention that we're actually, as a landowner in the area, pretty excited to see an actual planning document starting to come through and starting to come to fruition for building this type of residential and commercial development in this area. We think it's a great place for it to be. As experienced by our two projects, the Montage project and now our Sage project, there is a pretty healthy demand for this type of housing in the area, in your city. So I think it'll be very successful. So I encourage moving forward with what staff has presented to you in one form or another, and we look forward to seeing the planning document move on.
Great. Thank you very much. Elizabeth Cobb, Jeannie Haig, and Splendorio.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Elizabeth Cobb with Shea Properties, not to be confused by our sister company, Shea Homes. We build commercial properties. We build multifamily, commercial, office, and industrial. First off, we are here today in support of the city's efforts, staff's efforts. And as an urban planner in my background, I want to commend staff and their efforts and what they're doing with the public, bringing so much of this in the forefront so early, and appreciate the time they're taking to seek public input and the council's direction prior to engaging in pretty expensive technical studies. So I really appreciate that effort and the time we have. I do want to recognize that it is early in the process. There are many details that still need to be defined, that being the right density, circulation, infrastructure, development standards, scenic corridor issues, obviously, regulatory requirements. I only ask that as the process moves forward, that we be part of the preferred plan and key policy framework as property owners as well as stakeholders. We would like to provide some input and helpful insight into the development of that preferred plan. So thank you again for this opportunity, and we really support staff's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cobb. Jeannie Haig, Splendorio, and Justin Peterson.
Well, good evening. I'm here to represent Innovation Tri-Valley, ITV, and as a small business owner in town. And I'm just kind of reiterating what we've said in the past, that we need to look far into the future and really provide our businesses and residents the tools that they need to be successful and have the great quality of life that we have here already. We need to continue that. BART is really needed, not the emus and all those. We need the real BART here. It's going both directions. It's really increasing west to east also, and so we need to be able to have this destination on BART for people to be able to get to their work here. And that's only going to grow because ITV is really working on branding the area and getting our businesses to locate and grow here, so it's even going to increase. The housing is obviously critical, and we need the options to not only have more housing available, but to get some of the units like apartments and condos so that, as was mentioned, the younger generation can afford to live here and expand their families. And then the other thing it's impacting on my end is people in my generation, we're starting to having to take care of mom and dad. And I'm looking at a mother-in-law already in assisted living and a mother close to needing assisted living. And the rates for those are tied to the regular apartment rates. And so once you start having to charge $2,000 to $3,000 for a regular apartment, you add on care onto that, it's really getting steep for moms to pay for these. And personally, we're having to look at moving out of here so that we can do something with our parents. They have an affordable option to do. But that's an aside to that. But we need this type of plan development. The staff has done an excellent job of outreach and really figuring out what the community wants and needs. And we have great faith that will continue. They will look at the best possible alternatives and with your direction be able to come up with an excellent plan, we know. So we just want to make sure that everyone knows by now that we really are encouraging getting the housing here and the transit and keeping Livermore to have that quality of life that we so much enjoy right now, and not let that fall by the wayside because people can't afford to live here and we wither away. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haig. Splendorio, Justin Peterson, David McGeegan.
Good evening, Mayor, council people. I'm also here on behalf of, this is Splendorio. I'm here on behalf of the Innovation Tri-Valley, and I also chair its Housing, Infrastructure, and Transportation Committee. Jeannie did a great job, but I don't think anybody's ever put on the record what Innovation Tri-Valley is about, so let me read our mission. Innovation Tri-Valley is a business leadership association working to improve the business climate and quality of life in the Tri-Valley. ITV's vision is to create an interconnected hub of innovation in the Tri-Valley that spurs job growth and sustains a healthy economy and a vibrant community. So I don't want to echo, but Steve Riley said what I would have said. We want to attract the kind of companies and jobs that our economy in Northern California is creating, and we should have it in Livermore. And we also want to attract the younger people that make those companies great. And we want to have the opportunity to have that in Livermore. So I'd like to pass on a little bit of my own empirical information that I like to do every once in a while by just asking people. One is, there is a lot of traffic of people coming from the west going to both stations in Pleasanton and Dublin. And those are folks getting off at the West Dublin Pleasanton station, going to wonderful jobs around Stone Ridge. And my office is in Hacienda, and I see lots of people getting off the trains, going to their jobs at Oracle or Kaiser Permanente's IT department or other places more than a half a mile away, because I see them coming into my office, which is about maybe 2/3 of a mile, 3/4 of a mile. That's wonderful, and I think we should have that opportunity here in Livermore too, to attract those kind of jobs and those kind of people to our wonderful community, because they make it great. Other thing, my oldest son dragged me to Blacksmith Square on Friday night, and got dragged and saw a bunch of young families with kids. So after we left, I asked him, so, hey, Dante, do those people live in Livermore? He goes, well, Dad, maybe about half. He goes, that's great that they come here. He goes, let me ask you, how many of those people actually own a house in Livermore? He goes, none of them. They can't afford to. Thank you.
Thank you. And one of the things that's frustrating about the people that are riding the BART trains in is the MTC doesn't recognize that as part of transit-oriented development. The MTC only recognizes the houses and people going out to jobs. They don't recognize people coming into jobs. And they also don't recognize the impact of the San Joaquin Valley. They think that that's not impacting our commute here, but we all know it does. Justin Peterson, David McGeegan, and Gene King.
Good evening. My name is Justin Peterson. I'm a resident of Livermore and a licensed professional mechanical engineer. I'm here this evening to strongly encourage you to include LEED neighborhood development, LEED for buildings, and the WELL program into the project development that includes the BART terminal. A study published by The Guardian reveals that the Earth's climate temperature is rising at a rate that is 50 times faster than when it is coming out of an ice age. As an HVAC mechanical engineer, I am now not only designing buildings for new record-breaking temperature extremes, but I am also designing them for climate change resiliency, which accommodates for more severe droughts, more powerful weather systems, and sea level rise. I do this in part by applying the LEED rating system for buildings, which is a system that supports the triple bottom line, social responsibility, environment, and the green economy. But rather than just including LEED for buildings, shouldn't we be including this philosophy for entire developments? The U.S. Green Building Council also has a LEED rating system for neighborhood development called LEED ND, or LEED Neighborhood Development. This proven and well thought out program is perfect for the application of a development as part of a new BART terminal. It will fit well with what Livermore has already accomplished in its downtown First Street corridor. Please talk to your design professionals and research the examples of Boston and New York City and their associated suburbs, who both use LEED ND extensively in their developments. The other program that I want you to include is called WELL, a program by the International Well Building Institute. Certainly, addressing climate change and livable developments is essential to modern sustainability, but what about the building occupants? Shouldn't we be encouraging a healthier occupant-worker regimen? Have you ever felt anxious sitting all day at a desk, been disappointed with the unhealthy options that are available in most vending machines, felt disconnected from the outdoors while working indoors all day? The WELL program puts the working people first. This program fits along with the LEED program for buildings. It addresses human health, which in turn improves worker retention and satisfaction on the job. Well recognizes that 92% of office operation costs are the human capital, and therefore investing in this critical factor is vital to the success of working people. So please tell your development project manager to research and include LEAD and WELL programs into the Livermore development. Upon research, you will not only find the benefits of these programs far outweigh their costs, but that by incorporating these programs, you will be sure you are providing the best future for Livermore's residents, businesses, and the city itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. David McGeegan, Gene King, and Esther Ann Waltz.
David McGuigan, Ontario Drive. I moved into Livermore in '79, and at the time, there was talk of we're going to get a new movie theater. Actually bought out Tubbsville and all that, and I don't know, somehow BART coming to Livermore has always been the new movie theater for me, so it's good to see that we're actually getting some progress. My main concern, naturally, because I live here, I'm going to be worried about me getting a parking spot when I get to BART or be able to get there. And I kind of like to put things in scale, so I put out the Google Maps of the current Pleasanton BART station, and then I can compare it to the current map of where the BART station's going. And I kind of see that the area here, if I put the current parking lot, that's the open parking lot there, you got maybe 1,000 spots, and you're only getting about 1,000 if you max out the area there. So for 3,000, we're either going up or we're going someplace else. And I know how much we really love that massive parking structure that's already down there on the other side of the Pleasanton BART station. We have to really realize that part of the reason that people don't use Pleasanton BART from over in Tracy is because by the time they get there, all the spots are already taken. And the more spots you're going to make, the more opportunity that people are going to come and the more usage you're going to get, and that's the whole point of it. But I really think we need to address the parking as a overall neighborhood issue, because the side streets will get taken up by people. I mean, you drive by the Pleasanton BART station, they're already parked out at camp parks and stuff like that. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Gene King, Esther Ann Waltz, and Don Meeker.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. I'm all for BART. I'm all for transit-oriented development. I'm all for mixed-use things. I'm for public transportation. The thing I'm concerned about is the Scenic Corridor, that it is going to be a mile of it that is going to be obstructed. And I am concerned about the airport protection area. And I know you're not going to want to hear this, but I really wish it would go out to Greenville. Because at Greenville, you don't have so much trouble with the Scenic Corridor or the airport protection area, and you have more room so the things would not be high. And I know you don't want to hear it because you want to plan it. We all want BART to come. But it's just the wrong place. But as long as if it's going to be here and we've got to accept it and we've got to compromise, I would like the one that has the most open space. I think everybody has said that if you're going to have tall buildings and you're going to have all these things, you want to have more open space. So I was originally going to vote for number 2, but I see that most people like number 1 with the addition of adding more open space to number 1. And I think that's really important. If you're going to have the high-rise houses and all that stuff, you've got to have for people the open space and the green space and the trails. So if you can't move it to Greenville, thank you.
Not yet. Not yet. We're going to get there, though. Esther Ann Waltz, Don Meeker, Brendan Finley.
Good evening, Mayor Mashon and members of the council. I'm all for BART. I use BART and bus. That's my main form of getting around. I'm all for the mixed use. And with the mixed use out there, and I would like to put some thought into also for our members of the community who are in between home or in a state of being homeless, incorporate them into the plan too. And like get a shelter, because we do not have a shelter for single men, and also for our veterans who are not yet been housed. So there, and then and also maintain the open space. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Don Meeker, Brendan Finley, and Doug Giffen.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. Don Meeker, 2589 College Avenue. Attachment 1 is the map of the area, and I really like it. It's got a lot of details. It's got the arroyos in it. It's got where the buildings are located. It also has UBC, which is a short term for University behind Costco. And there's one area that really isn't labeled too well, and I wanted to address that, and that's the northwest section of the area that's, I'm assuming that's where the hills are. That's part of the Scenic Corridor. And if there could be some labeling there. Right now it's just kind of blank. It's like, do we fall off the end of the earth? You know, it's beyond the urban growth groundy. Does it just, you know? So I think some kind of labeling there would just kind of indicate what it is, whether it's being impacted as a scenic corridor, or if it's hills, or some indication of what that blank space is, because it would just kind of give balance to the map itself, because on the other side you've got the airport beyond the urban growth boundary. I would thinking just in terms of an aesthetic balance to the map, some labeling could be in that space.
Okay, this is the northwest
Northwest
corner.
Yeah,
the one that's just sort of beige.
That's just kind of there. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just kind of balance it out. It would look, but it's a really nice map.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll get that labeled for you. Thank you. Brendan Finley, Doug Giffen, and Mark Pleiss. Mr. Finley, you're here for the chamber, aren't you?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. First of all, the staff, thank you for a great presentation. On behalf of the chamber, we again want to support our stance for the BART to Livermore and the need for the additional housing. As we continue to see Livermore grow as an innovation hub, it's critical that we get the right talent here to work in these businesses. We need to support the thriving businesses and keep our economy on growth with a strong workforce. Today's business talent not only wants stability in employment, but they're also concerned about productivity, personal time, and community. Having the BART will get many workers to our area, as well as guests who want to experience the above. But most importantly, will also bring leisure to the travel region here in Livermore. Housing, we'll continue to know that housing and retail will draw the talent that we need to help our business community. Enhance the businesses that we have here in Livermore downtown, and most importantly, keep Livermore as a vibrant community that continues to drive business, make it a place to call home for those that work here, and also a community for those that are young to old that want Livermore to remain home here and call Livermore. We must have housing that we can do this for all. We want to again thank you for continuing to balance the local community and the business and making Livermore home for all of us. Thanks for your decisions.
Thanks, Mr. Finley. Doug Giffen, Mark Pleiss, Robert Allen.
Good evening. Doug Giffen with Chamberlain Associates. We are the owner of the 11-acre vacant infill parcel at the northwest corner of I-580 and Airway. We've owned the site for 11 years and have addressed a comment letter in your packet tonight with regards to the neighborhood plan. Our site's land use and development standards are under consideration for new zoning, new standards, and a new land use designation as a part of the city's neighborhood plan. As our site is under consideration, we are requesting a few items be studied. In general, we are proposing that a few minor land use opportunities be considered to create one cohesive, updated set of rules for the parcel. The alternatives booklet reflects a tentative map that is expired and was created by a previous owner. Our site is now one parcel that has two separate zonings on it. They were structured around this expired map. Since the new zoning standards and land use designations are proposed for our site now, it makes sense that these regulations should be up to date and work well for the single parcel. We also request that reasonable building heights be studied to allow for high-quality, attractive development consistent with the types of uses anticipated for the site. Our site is within the plan area, and there are a number of reasons why our site should be studied as are outlined in the letter in your packet. We have shared section drawings with city staff to help them study this request. With regards to the three alternatives, we do have concerns about the potential development numbers and that they would impact the allowable FARs, specifically with alternatives 2 and 3. For this reason, we prefer alternative 1 with our requested changes for our site as outlined in that letter. We would like to thank city staff for meeting with us to discuss our requests and appreciate the progress we've made. We support staff and Planning Commission's recommendations and kindly request that city staff be directed to continue working with me to try and come up with a proposal that staff and I can jointly support for review by the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Pleiss, Robert Allen, John Steinbush.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. First of all, staff, I commend staff for doing a great job of a major undertaking they have, which has just begun. They got many years to go to do this. I'm here representing Cornerstone Fellowship. Cornerstone Fellowship has about 5,000 people that go to church at the campus. They also own about 13 acres kind of adjacent across the creek from where the property is. And we are obviously in support of Alternative 1. Some of the things that Cornerstone would like to consider is kind of basically a workforce housing, which is much needed, as a lot of people have said already. Affordables, staff housing, whatever. Even the college would be in need of housing as well. So we would definitely support some kind of a workforce student kind of staff housing on Alternative 1. The only real concern I have is on the tech hub portion of the zoning. It's just a bit, the blocks are a bit small when it comes to developing like an office campus or a tech hub. You would probably need a much bigger footprint of a building if that were the case. They're just small blocks. Otherwise, it's off to a great start, and we support it, and Cornerstone is excited to be part of that and one of the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pleiss. Robert Allen, John Steinbush, and Nancy Bankhead. Mr. Allen.
We are told at the regional rail meeting that we could not get full BART to Livermore until 2027, 11 years from now. I'll only be 101 years old at that time. I'd sure like to see it. Wheels Forward plans a commute hour express bus from the transit center to the BART station running every half hour. Since BART trains run on a 15-minute headway, I would urge that it be made every 15 minutes and that it be done not only just during the commute hour, but all day. That's not enough, what they plan. 30 years ago, BART bought 53 acres at Isabel 580, paving the way for the new freeway interchange and a future BART station. At the time of our initiative petition, there was not the construction of the freeway, the toll road in the middle of the freeway. There was room in the middle. That might be a problem. BART's Park and Ride site at Isabel and 580 has very little use because they lack a viable transit link to the station. Wheels Consultant claims that lot is too small to support the bus link. It is a lot of BART land, flat land, vacant land, which could be developed for parking there before the station is ever built. I would urge that the the able commute, I call Allen's Park Livermore Express commute, be put into effect. Parking fills early, costs $3 a day at the station. The commute that I propose would give Livermore dependable, nearly seamless access to BART at less than the cost of parking alone, if you can find a place to park there. It would open up more parking at the station, not only for Livermore, but also for Dublin and Pleasanton riders. Looks like I'm out of time, but I'd like to commend Bob Vinn and the staff for a marvelous job that they've done in bringing this to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And we'll get you on that train. And we have your written comments. Thank you. John Steinbush and Nancy Bankhead.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is John Steinbush. I'm with Colliers in Pleasanton. Here tonight representing several property owners with land in the planning area. Also have some comments relative to the alternative. We're supportive of staff and planning commission with alternative one. However, have a couple of comments that we feel should be taken into consideration on alternative one. One of those is the parking. Right now, the parking is entirely on the south side of the freeway. We think that the plan should consider putting some parking north of the freeway to lessen the pressure on East Airway Boulevard and the Isabel East Airway interchange and intersection. The office component of the plan, historically, Livermore's not had a vibrant office market, and the Tri-Valley, San Ramon, Pleasanton, and Dublin, has seen a very slow recovery of the suburban office market since the economic crash in 2008. Certainly, if office is going to come to the Isabel BART station, it should be adjacent to the BART station so that the commuters on BART can walk to their office building. Also, in order to attract corporate users to this location, visibility and access are a key. Thus, the office land should be adjacent to the freeway, and as was stated earlier, there should be parcels large enough to build campus-type facilities, say 150 to 300,000 square feet. The third comment I have on the land use is the business park concept. I mean, historically, business park has been 1- and 2-story buildings, more of a sprawling R&D type back office campus. We're seeing those types of land uses in the Bay Area disappear. Land is so valuable that developers are coming in and knocking those buildings down and building multi-family residential or more multi-story office on those types of sites simply because of land scarcity. As to the specific properties that property owners I'm here to represent, the Gandolfo family, who owns the pumpkin patch, they're in support of alternative one. However, alternative one does not provide a land use for all of their land. A portion of it is left blank, and this property is not in the city. The Gandolfos are willing to participate in the neighborhood plan and annex their land to the city, but they'd want a compatible land use on 100% of the parcel in order to do that. Second, the Condor Fund. These are the 2 5-acre parcels at Comcast Drive and North Canyons Parkway. We support the residential designation, and I'd point out that these properties have been zoned for business park for almost 30 years and they're not developed, so residential would be key. Just 2 more short comments. The Hicks property and the Kent properties east of the planning area, or on East Airway Boulevard, have a neighborhood village designation, which is 35 units per acre. They're in neighborhoods with 1- and 2-story houses, so we would ask that that be lowered 1 notch to the neighborhood transition designation. And then finally, the interstate storage, mini storage facility, which is east of the Gandolfo parcel. You have a letter in your package from the managing partner on that. We'd request a dual land use designation there. That's a very successful facility. It's not going to be torn down anytime soon to build be built for houses, and there's a concern about a non-conforming use if their industrial is taken away. So we'd ask for a dual designation as is found in the other two neighborhood plans in Livermore, which were industrial lands converted to residential with a dual designation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steinbush. And finally, our last speaker is Nancy Bankhead.
Hello. I kind of agree with what he just said. Out there right now, it's industrial highway kind of zoning, and it's passé because we don't have Portola overpass coming from the freeway now. I'm really glad to see the city is planning this and getting stuff done now, that everything is workable together, instead of we having things grandfathered in or things being built that don't fit into our city anymore. So I'm excited about you doing zoning out there and getting it where everybody's happy, although I guess not everybody's going to be happy, but most of us are. So I'm for Plan 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's. I've got a request to take a short break. We just got through the comments. That was our last speaker. Let's take about 5 minutes and be right back here. January 29th special meeting, the February 29th special meeting of the Livermore City Council. We're back for part 2. We've just finished hearing all the public comments. Now what I'm going to do is open it up for questions first for the council and then on to comments. So first, do we have any questions?
Sorry.
I heard
I clicked.
okay. Councilor Spadowski.
Sure. General questions for staff. What would be the impact of this plan on our development rate? You stated over, what was it, the 10, 15 years that we were 0.3 to 0.8% per year in growth. Would this suddenly bump us up to 1%, 2%, 3%? What would be the expected impact over time? Because realizing that we're not approving it and it's not being built overnight, it's a specific plan which will take, as you stated, 20 to 25 years to complete.
Yeah, and I think you hit an important point there. This is going to be spread over a longer time frame, and it'll be based on market conditions as to, first of all, when the private owners want to sell their project for redevelopment. But the development that does occur will need to be within the city's adopted growth management rate that I'd mentioned, which is a 0.5 to 2.5 rate based on 2002 housing units. So they would have to fit into that growth rate. And again, how it grows over time will be somewhat dependent on the private market and the desires of the owner.
The city basically has the ability to set its growth rate within that range. You saw your graph. You know that 200 units a year is just under 1% growth rate. If you grew at 200 units a year over 20 years, that would be 4,000 units. So you can sort of get the scale in there. Development within this area will account for about 0.8, 0.7% if you on average grew at that rate. The bulk of your growth in the community during the later part of that time will be concentrated up here as the rest of your areas ultimately are developed. The other area that we expect in the very long term, of course, is the Greenville neighborhood plan as we build development around that when we do phase 2. And we would expect that some point at the midpoint or later of the development of this. So clearly well within your general plan limits of the 0.5 to 2.5 if you even set aside a full percentage point for this neighborhood all by its lonesome.
Okay, great. Talking about the Scenic Corridor, it's about a 1 mile length that we're looking at for the Scenic Corridor. We're not expecting a contiguous break in the Scenic Corridor. So what I'm saying is we're not expecting 1 full mile blocked length of the Scenic Corridor. Are we? Is it anticipated to be broken up a little bit? Here and there, you are looking at Scenic Corridor exemptions, not just a flat, 1 mile section wall, basically, that's blocking views.
No, we would not expect to have a wall of development along that 1 mile stretch. There will be changes in height, and there will be space between buildings, open space, green space between buildings, and some varying heights and design. so it will not be a wall of development.
Right. That's, I think, one of the impressions that I've been getting from some people, that they think that the 1 mile length means that that entire mile corridor will be impacted from end to end, and that's just not the case. It will be impacts throughout the corridor, not necessarily contiguous. What is our ability to state or to specify rental units on some of the parcels sections? Will that be fleshed out later? Can we do that during this phase? Is it something that's recommended, been studied?
As part of the development of the specific plan, we will be looking at housing policies for this area. And for example, we can be looking at affordable housing policies and what might be appropriate for this area. And we can look at goals and objectives for rental housing versus market rate, but we have not developed those recommendations or policies yet. But
So
we
that's-
certainly will take input on that.
And at that point, we could consider any type of development impacts if we were to raise the affordable housing allocation from 15 to 20%. Would that be, at what point can we see the impacts if we make that proposal, or if a proposal for an increase in affordable housing is made at some point?
Depends on whether your concept is to do that citywide in a directed area, just in the neighborhood plan. Ultimately, if you would like us to consider that as an alternative as a part of this planning process, that should be part of your motion. We wouldn't be doing that automatically. One of the things we'll be looking at, as you're aware, is the overall residual land value analysis, including the full funding of all of the necessary infrastructure for the plan area. The city's policy has been that development ultimately is responsible for the infrastructure it relies upon. As you saw in some of the plans, there's some pretty neat, nice infrastructure here: plazas, green space, parks, overcrossings, trails, and other things. Ultimately, a funding plan is a part of your specific plan as well, so we'll be taking that into account in our analysis as well. But if there is council consensus on us to do exploration on affordability, that would be appropriate direction to give us this evening.
Okay, great. The airport protection area history. So I just want to be clear that what was the purpose behind developing the city airport protection area? What was the main goal? Was it to actually protect property around the airport from what?
Yeah, the airport protection area is a general plan designation that is a random rectangle in the general plan that prohibits housing within a certain distance of the runways. And it's exactly that. It's an airport protection area designed to protect the airport and minimize residences within that area to minimize noise complaints. And it was established in the mid-1980s?
1991.
1991.
And so the concept there was by drawing a line a mile north and south parallel to the runways and a mile off of each end of the runways, that by limiting housing development in that area, you would limit potential conflicts. But it was not based upon noise studies or traffic patterns or crash patterns or safety concerns or any other items. It was based upon a perception that essentially limiting housing closer to the airport would be ultimately good for the airport's long-term survival. And of course, that's a very different kind of policy document, although it's served an important purpose for us, than the county adopted safety zones, height zones, and noise patterns, which are based on empirical data.
Gotcha. So I just wanted to make sure, because when you hear airport protection, I think most people think it's the other way around, that we're protecting people from the airport in some manner, but it's more protecting the airport from people.
Encroachment.
Almost encroachment, right, or complaints. And as someone who spent the first 5 years living in the landing path of the airport, I definitely know some of the impacts. It's great when the bombers fly over, though. The timing with the current BART plans, how does this fit in with BART adopting their preferred method of coming out to Livermore?
So the city's process is a little bit ahead of BART, and that's by design. So BART will consider the plan that you all adopt in their evaluation, and so the housing and the jobs that we're providing in the plan area will be modeled for ridership, and BART will also look at their system expansion policies in light of whatever we adopt. They are expected to take action on the project in late 2017, and you'll be seeing this plan, the neighborhood plan, in early 2017.
So that provides enough time for BART to factor it into their formula for scoring the potential projects?
Yes.
Okay. And then also, at what point will we be seeing, because I know there's interest in renderings for the Scenic Corridor that was extremely helpful with the current Shea project. And I remember one of the comments that I made on the Planning Commission about that is we were trying to avoid that sea of rooftops look to a development. Also, avoiding massive grading in the area, which I don't know if this is more of a question or comment than a question, but I don't necessarily know that you'd want to grade to a level of bringing structures below the Scenic Corridor to the point where you might have drainage or flood control or any other issue that would come up with that massive amount of grading. But at what point, or will we be seeing renderings of how the mixed uses actually mix? They're great photos in all the slides, showing us examples of what each mixed use would look like. But in the next phase, will we be seeing kind of more of a rendering of entire areas, so we could see how the lower density housing mixes with some of the business? If we have plans for that, I think that would be very helpful to give kind of an overview. I don't know if that's possible in the next round or.
Yes, it is possible. We can provide for the next phase here, which would be developing the actual preferred plan based on your feedback tonight. We can bring back that preferred plan with visual simulations and visual aids to give the council and the community a much better understanding of the impacts that you'd see from I-580 looking at this area.
Okay. A few last comments. I do like alternative one. I agree with all of the Planning Commission comments and comments from the focus groups and the outreach. I believe it is critical to have that the continuous pedestrian loop in Plan 1. Also, any additional 580 pedestrian crossings like we saw in Plan 2 and 3, I think would be great for access. We only have really one chance to get this right in terms of pedestrian access when it's being built. It's not something that we can really go back and look at and add. We know the difficulties of adding some of the access in North Livermore, so I think that that's critical of the project and that we get it right. And then the last thing about the BART parking, why I was so excited that it was brought up earlier, based on that 2008 BART parking study, 67% of the people parking were from San Ramon, Pleasanton, and Dublin. So I'm hoping that the 2015 study will shed additional light on some of the travel patterns. When you think about it, 67%, at least based on that study, currently they are not going to drive out this way to park at BART. So hopefully that the amount of parking that we're installing in BART will include a much higher percentage for Livermore residents, just based on our vicinity to the parking. I would hope that we see that once this station is built, that we would see through surveys or license plate surveys that half of it is Livermore residents, or a very large percentage because it's so close. So when the BART parking study came up during a Wheels board meeting, I really cued in on that, the statistics. I was surprised because most people, I believe the impression is you have everybody coming over the Altamont and taking up all the parking spaces before anybody can get a local space. And I could see where you develop that opinion when you're driving there at 8:30, and you blame it on the people from over the hills. So when that 15 study comes out, I'd be very interested to get the results and to see how it would integrate into this plan. So other than that, that's just my questions.
Okay.
I do have comments later.
Okay, very good. We'll get everybody's questions first. Councilmember Warner?
Yeah, we've got a few on mostly around our planning options and what kind of flexibility we have here and kind of what the rules are. It was, so I'll do it in this order. It was Gene King mentioned that wouldn't it be great if we just planned it all the way out for BART to Greenville? But we can't do that. But to what extent can we think about the fact that it will ultimately go to Greenville, and that we prevent ourselves from doing something suboptimal. For instance, we probably don't ultimately need a maintenance yard at the Isabel area, but we could put one at the end. There's the parking question, and then if you also look at the way you have that infill station at the West Dublin Pleasanton, you don't have the same kind of housing around that as you do at the Dublin Pleasanton line. So, to what extent can we at least allude, coherently to what's ultimately going to happen, and have that impact some flexibility in the rules?
So your staff is certainly having an eye on what the overall project is, of ultimately going all the way out to Greenville and connecting to ACE. That's crucial as we sort of do our thinking. It's crucial as we think about the entire project to design it that way. Each phase, however, at this point, because the second phase is not fully funded, has to sort of stand on its own. So on the one hand, the regulatory framework is a little bit rigid from that perspective, so we will meet the necessary rules there. The other piece from your staff's perspective is that this actually combination of uses creates a complete neighborhood, and we feel very strongly that it has inherent positive features to that neighborhood, and actually fully utilizes the regional investment of the rail here. But things like tail tracks, storage, all of those sorts of things are things that your staff is certainly aware of and keeping in mind as we think about this in two phases. Obviously, BART has to wrestle with this as well, understanding that the interim step between the next extension is sometimes a little longer than they prefer. We were thinking it was going to be just minutes after Dublin and Pleasanton got their station that we'd start construction on ours, and it's been a little bit of a pause there. We hope that it won't be that long for our next phase. So we'll certainly be keeping those things in mind. We appreciate the council's direction on that, that we think of this as a holistic project, and your staff has been doing that since the beginning.
And particularly, where the, I've looked at, you guys showed me some of the options as to whether we have how many tracks we have in the median versus off somewhere north or someplace else. And so getting real clarity and working with BART on flexibility here to make this the right solution ultimately. I mean, that's something I'm very interested in really understanding. The second question I've got is around parking. And as someone who's first started riding BART in the mid-'80s, and I ride it every day now, I'm real familiar with the parking issues. And so we talk about this is going to have 3,000 spaces. That's the most anywhere. But what's the total spaces in Dublin, Pleasanton?
Our trained staff has a list. Look at that.
Yes. Dublin, Pleasanton has 2,886 spaces.
Okay. So that's 114 difference. And to say this is the most anywhere and to get excited about it personally, it's within the noise level.
But it's true.
Well, yeah, but let's be clear what it really means. Parking is an issue. 3,000 is not enough, if based on what I experience, and especially since we're going to be encouraging a lot of people now coming across from the Central Valley, and Councilman Spadowski is right. Nobody's going to go backwards there. So we will be able to, draw heavily from us. But we got to admit the competition of 4 spaces from the Central Valley. And, right now, I'll just tell you as an aside, they don't park. I mean, people from the western part of the valley don't park. They're not going to come out to Livermore Park. But right now, you can't get a seat because people are going backwards on the line to come to the head of the line and get back there. So that's what's going to continue. So in addition to parking, don't anticipate we're going to have at the head of the line you're going to get a seat necessarily with the way this stuff works. So what I'm real interested in is to what extent can we reserve some land for the preference for Livermore residents? Because the issue here is being able to get a spot reasonably during the late morning. Because if you don't get there by 8 o'clock, you're done. And that's not everybody wants to be in commute hours to go and do their business. So to what extent can we, in this plan, designate some land that we could be for the preference of, giving Livermore residents preference rather than people from the Central Valley? To what extent can we do that?
We absolutely can do that. It would need to be land that's not owned by BART, and the city would be responsible for the cost of building whatever parking facility we would plan there.
Yeah, I know. I guess maybe let me put it this way. To what extent is that practical, and are you planning on considering that?
Well, we're absolutely looking at that issue because we've heard that throughout the outreach, that people want us to look at splitting the parking to have some on the north side as well as the south for a number of different reasons. So we'll be looking at that issue and coming back next time we meet with you to talk about that in the spring.
But legally, we could manage this to give Livermore residents a preference.
Yes, if it were a Livermore owned and operated parking facility, we could provide parking passes to Livermore residents who signed up for something along those lines.
So are you going to be seriously looking at this as an option?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Your issue of feasibility comes down to funding sources. So if you want preferential parking, sort of two ways to do that is to price the preferential parking where it's a break even for us. In other words, as far as construction and management of that, that's probably $5 to $6 a day. However, in the time frame we're talking about, BART system-wide parking is likely to be not terribly different than that. The other flip side is you always have the policy ability to invest general fund dollars in those issues, and that'll be your trade-off there of sort of how cheap or how expensive do you do that, and how sophisticated a program do you want to do on that? Down to monthly parkers at one rate, and if you just happen to be there for a single day, it's a different rate. So those are all absolutely things that we can do, and we will be doing some exploration on that, as well as taking a look at other options to get people essentially easily and cleanly to that station. So at a certain point, just like our paid lanes out on the freeway, it's not the incremental cost, it's not that extra buck, it's the certainty of knowing that absolutely there will be a space there when you need it.
Right, and that's what because one thing is during the commute hours, but if you really want to make it a real valuable, it's this impromptu, I like to take BART in kind of thing, and I think we should explore what that would take to do that. The next question is there's this half-mile reasonable distance to walk, and remember when Councilman Horner said, Livermore doesn't have a parking problem, it's got a walking problem. How hard and fast is that half mile, and what are we thinking there? In terms of, to what extent does that half mile thought actually influence the constraints of the design, and do we need flexibility around that half mile thinking, or is it fuzzy, or is it what?
So there are two answers to that. Regulatorily, it's quite hard. It's actually written into the regulations. So you get counted one way on one side of the line, you get counted another way on the other side of the line. In real life, it's much fuzzier. What's your topography? Is it flat? Is it sloping upward or downward? All of those sorts of things matter. How well lit is it? How safe is it perceived to be? All of those things affect how far you're willing to drive. What's the urban design finish in the area? Can you see your destination? All of those are things that matter in that half mile. You can get people to walk noticeably further than a half mile if it's a very enjoyable environment, and bluntly, if their alternatives to doing that are really poor. So if walking, I'll walk a lot longer in San Francisco because the options are not real great to park right next to in front of the shop I want to go to. Then you sort of got another balancing piece, which is sort of what's the look and feel that you want for your neighborhood. So the short answer is, in real life, it's fuzzy. From a regulatory standpoint, it's quite rigid.
And the regulatory is like, it's the crow flies. It's not actual distance walked.
Yes, from a funding standpoint, yes.
Okay. Right. So then the other question that was alluded to earlier about how much we all love that parking garage and things out of there in Dublin. To what extent do we have influence, veto, control over the architecture, or how does this kind of stuff happen?
The actual design of the station would happen during the design task that follows this environmental. So what we're working with BART now is just concepts in order to cost the facility. So there will be an opportunity for input by our public and by our bodies and the city council when they actually get to designing the station and the parking structure.
So the question was, how much control veto do we have? I mean, it's, you know, the typical thing is thank you for your input, but to what extent do we control and get approval for the design so that we can avoid some of what we see that we, you know, I have to see it every day and doesn't make my life happy. So what control do we have over the architecture and the quality here?
Well, I would believe that BART would go through a normal development process with the city, but they are an entity of the state and really are not subject to our local regulations. But I think in practice they go through the process.
So you have strong influence. You do not have absolute control. The other piece of the puzzle here is it possible to design a parking structure for about the same amount of money that is better looking rather than ugly? And that's sort of one of your fundamental, and the answer is yes. We certainly know about 4 or 5 very key features, which is horizontal decking on the outer edge, essentially cladding that's appropriate at points, coloring, and if you sort of correct those big 3, you'd actually have not a bad looking station or parking structure at Dublin Pleasant. And those 3 are out of whack at that particular location, fairly fundamentally, and that makes for a displeasing fashion.
Well,
BART actually has some very nice looking parking structures. The one at Walnut Creek, from my perspective, looks pretty good.
Obviously, you know, what you just said is kind of common sense, and so my question is, how does this happen, and can the community prevent it?
The good news is the community can weigh in on it, and my belief is we don't have much of a risk of that here. We're very active.
The difference between the Dublin parking structure and the future Isabel parking structure is the Isabel parking structure is surrounded by a lot of existing residential neighborhoods, and they'll have tremendous influence on BART, much more influence than when the BART parking structure was built in Dublin, where most of the complaints came specifically from drivers on 580.
Yeah, and of course the other thing is, if you just look at the station design between the West Dublin and the other, I mean, it's, so they just look at what happens out here, and I think you can understand why I'm concerned, and I really want to make sure that we do whatever we can to influence the design. Then we also heard the suggestion of this is an opportunity perhaps to think about some environmentally friendly building specs. To what extent are we considering what was proposed about the LEED and the WELL programs?
Yeah, and we'll build some of those provisions into this specific plan. The city already has rather stringent environmental sustainability requirements, but within this specific plan, we'll be able to build either using LEED and some of the WELL program, something like that, or equivalent types of sustainability programs.
Okay, that's most of my questions. I'll save comments.
Okay. Vice Mayor Gary?
Just 2 questions. The first is a follow-up on our parking discussion tonight and the numbers that have been bandied around. Without maybe going up the map and predisposing a final location, if additional parking could even be funded, city-centric parking for BART, have you given any math thought yet into roughly how many more spaces are we talking about? Because frankly, if it was 250, it doesn't touch the issue. If you're talking another 1,000 plus on top of the almost 3,000, it maybe helps the issue. So I just wondered if you've even conceptualized what additional parking means.
No, we haven't gotten to that level of detail, but part of that issue is whether it's structured or surface and how much land we want to displace that could otherwise be DOD.
If I could just real quick, I mean, you're not trying to build necessarily enough parking so that you've more than covered the peak and that you can do it. What the real question is, how many would you need at the margin that were reserved for the more impromptu? So it's a different kind of calculation. You'd have to kind of know what you would need before you could answer that question. It's not necessarily a percentage of what's there.
One of your issues, too, is bluntly, your city manager would want you to size that structure just a hair smaller than you need it, because once we buy it, if we're basically planning on having spaces to be rented out to get our money back, we want those suckers full. And so from that, so we need to be a little careful, because ample parking in some people's minds means hundreds and hundreds of spaces empty each day, which I would find horrifying if we had ultimately to pay our bills.
And I wouldn't want the listeners to misread my question. I'm just trying tonight to frame the ongoing public conversation. So when you just throw out more parking, that means different things to different people. And if we're talking again, midday, last-minute drive-ups of some reasonable number, that's one issue. If somebody else envisions, another 1,000, that's so I can commute in from over the hill and park.
The point is just think it through carefully and allow for other than commute hours.
The next question is back on the Scenic Corridor. And I think it's easy to talk about, but hard to be very explicit when a question is asked and answered and discussed out in the community. If the current flat plan is built up as envisioned, and we've bandied around it's roughly a mile and roughly 1/8 of the Scenic Corridor in the city limits, from any view shed on the freeway or a frontage road, entering that mile at the first oblique angle, is a passenger going to see any of the ridgeline tops? Because it's one thing to say I'll occasionally see between a building, but if the buildings are only a setback of, let's say, 30 to 70 feet twice, if the height of the buildings are so high, and we've talked 3 to 5 story office buildings, my interpretation is the general massing over distance over time is such no hills will be visible. That will obliterate the northern ridge lines from both directions. Or am I wrong?
So the first answer is we need to do the simulations, and then you can draw your own conclusions. The other thing to keep in mind is that Shea Sage, in big round terms, is about a quarter of that mile distance. You know what Shea Sage looks like already. Now, there can be additional units next to that, but that piece, you've got a map on it, they're actually building it out there, so you already know that particular piece. As you approach and get near the actual BART station itself, which is in the freeway, has 2 big bridges across the freeway. Then you have Isabel Interchange, which is a giant bridge across the freeway. So heading both east and west, those 2 great big structures will blow out a fairly big chunk of your view. And of course, that's why the original exemption was there, because we understood that with the freeway interchange, we're adding yet another structure of essentially that same scale. But I think the most complete answer will be when we bring back in a few months some of these visual simulations. You'll see in the center of the development, you have much taller stuff. Out at the edges, you're down to 3-story development, much like what Shea has out there. So it's not going to be a uniform answer throughout the mile. It's going to be quite variable depending on whether you're coming up or just under one of those big bridges, and whether you're at the center of that development where it's actually you will not see through those buildings, or out at the edges like at Sage where you will be able to see over the top, and you'll have all 3 of those answers in fairly quick succession.
But for the discussion tonight, the dark purple spots on the north side of the freeway under land use designations, immediately back of the freeway, are we not proposing multi-story office buildings?
I would say that essentially in your tech hub that a noticeable chunk of your views there are going to be gone.
Right.
I wouldn't say all of it, but yeah, I would say in that area, now a portion of it's already gone because of the interchange obliterates a portion of that. But I think that piece, would be pretty clear to say is that a fairly significant impact from those buildings at that location.
Okay, thank you.
Just most of my questions have been answered, but just if we could identify that northwest corner for Mr. Meeker.
We can do that.
Oh, do we know what that is?
Well, there's 2 pieces. On Figure 1, the northwest corner that is white and has no shade is outside the city limit, outside the urban growth boundary. That's unincorporated county.
Okay, so nothing's going to happen there.
No.
Anyway. Okay.
And then the piece next to it that is shaded but not labeled is basically the hillside above the current office park, above the charter school and such.
Okay.
That hillside's under permanent easement.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. And one of the other speakers had asked about housing for veterans and also mentioned the need for homeless shelters. And I would just reiterate that there are 6 shelters in the Tri-Valley for the disadvantaged, and all of those 6 are in Livermore. There are no other shelters anywhere in the Tri-Valley. So Livermore is really doing a tremendous job to support those that are disadvantaged. And I continue my discussions with Secretary McDonald about repurposing the VA hospital as possibly housing for returning or homeless veterans. So we're still working on that, so they're not forgotten by a long shot. Okay, those are my questions. With that, let's go in reverse order for comments. Vice Mayor Gary.
First of all, I'd like to thank staff and the project teams on their work. I think in terms of community planning, it's an outstanding effort as a flat plan, and I'll come back to that in a second. I think you can tell from my questions I've got some indigestion on the Scenic Corridor. But as a flat, mixed-use, walkable communities, intact plan, I think you've hit a home run. And my personal feedback is Alternative 1 with some of the walkability aspects of Alternative 2 are the best mix of ingredients going forward. Having said that, my indigestion on the Scenic Corridor is this is Livermore. This is the Livermore Valley. The Scenic Corridor has existed for a considerable period of time with a singular goal. And in effect, we're saying, let's sell a piece of our soul to get BART. And as one of your elected representatives, I'm okay with that if that's where this community really wants to go. And I don't know if a few residents at a few meetings, including tonight, that haven't yet seen elevations and visuals, we 5 have had enough input to say on our own hook, let's blow out a chunk of the Scenic Corridor. And when I say blow out, I think that's the end result. We're not talking a few tweaks above the visual lines for parapets or towers to differentiate the form and mass of a building. We're talking about significant development on the north side of the freeway where the land immediately slopes up. I share Mrs. King's comments and others I've heard in the community over the last week since this has been out. Ideally, this would be a straight-through track, and we could build a fabulous, almost build as tall as you want at Greenville. We could build a business park. We could build a huge walkable community, and the regional agencies don't want to fund the rail line that far. My personal preference would be the rail line be punched through. We build at Greenville, and in 50 years they come back and add Isabel like they did in West Pleasanton. But we're now susceptible to saying we want BART. The community said it wants BART, but we never put a price tag on what BART means. And I know when I first ran for office 5 years ago and I was asked about it, I said, let's see what the community plan generates. Let's not cement the deal. And in that time, regional planning, the economy's changed, and the regional funding formulas are telling Livermore what its density ought to be. I believe that if you're not going to save the scenic vistas of the hills, why save the hills? I spent a lot of time on this. I drove the freeway both directions this weekend. I tried to visualize all the impacts of the proposed development, the existing development. I tried to visualize what's left of the Scenic Corridor because much of the Scenic Corridor was impacted before it was passed. It was already a finger in the dike sense to say, Livermore isn't going to be a freeway urbanized tunnel at our end of the valley. And we've largely been successful at that. So again, in an ideal world, we would build around this station with parking. We'd build the station. We'd build out the housing in the general plan as described tonight and tell the regional entities, this is our share for transportation. They're not going to take that answer. My request is this is a significant enough exemption. You've already got landowners in the package tonight asking us, me too, If you're going to go high for your own plan, go high for my parcel. And if we start to make exemptions only as a council, where does that end up 3, 4, 5 councils from now? Well, they exempted the train village. They exempted somewhere else. And at some point, do you wake up and not have a scenic corridor? What if we fund the scenic corridor, change it, allow incremental growth, and BART doesn't come? How do we tie maybe taking out a chunk of the scenic corridor only when BART and the regionals fund it? Quid pro quo. We'll sell that little piece of our soul if, in fact, BART to Isabel comes. But if this is just going to develop and never get BART, where did that leave Livermore? I think as we drive it, it's pretty special. What I'd like to suggest, I'm not ready to make a motion yet, I'm just thinking out loud to my peers, is I think this needs more effort now and in the next phase of planning. And I think the simulations ought to come back to this council. This council and the public ought to have a second conversation. This council should give guidance to our planning commission. This is too important to delegate to the planning commission on the first pass. Secondarily, as a community conversation occurs, I think maybe not the outcome, and I'm not at all, do not misunderstand what I'm about to say. I'm not advocating calling the BART question. But it may well be, as a community, maybe we put something on the ballot that says this community will exempt the transit-oriented development to get transit. It's the right thing to do for our character community. And if we do, it's with a vote of the people, and it locks in the sight lines to say no more. So there's not this constant nipping at future council saying my parcel 2, my parcel 3. And do we maybe have a collaborative conversation that way and say BART and MTC and the other regional funders, community's on board. You fund it, we'll do the land use changes and swallow hard on our scenic vistas. But I'm very nervous about where this slippery slope is going, that it's just another exemption to the scenic corridor. I think we're starting to take a big bite out of what's remaining special at the Livermore end of the valley. Thank you.
Councilmember Warner.
So I'd like to second in my comments what you're saying. I've been here 39 years, and I've saw 680 go from a scenic highway to what it is, and it's not quite particularly pleasant to drive anymore. And I've seen what happened at the west end of the valley, and I kind of like your description here that we're talking about making a deal with the devil, and you probably want to be careful. So I agree, and that's why I was interested in understanding to what extent can we think about the future, where it's really going to go when we plan this. And so I would second what you're saying about let's make sure we know what we're doing, and that to the extent we can, we've locked up the future so that we're not going down that slope. And it's, as I saw, I've watched what happened at the other end of the valley, and there's no doubt in my mind that if we're not careful, it'll happen here. And the best thing I've heard about this thing is because, you know, we listed here was a lot of objectives, and they're wonderful objectives, but it strikes me that you can't have it all, and that what we're really talking about here is making compromise. And in particular, the biggest compromise is our scenic views and what we kind of represent when you go through this area versus having this transportation. So I don't think it's been framed quite that way, but I'll bet you that it would be, that we should really think about it. So I also believe that, as we saw in that simulation with the recent Shea project, and we modified the thinking about the scenic corridor, was the sense of, well, it's really, you're looking at 45 degrees. Nobody's got their head at 90 degrees to the road and enjoying the view while they're going down there in rush hour and not going to hit somebody, right? So the practical point is that you put the kind of buildings that are proposed here, and you're thinking about reality, you're not going to see anything. So I think we ought to, or unless we put some big gaps in these buildings, but that's not what this looks like. So I think from what I've seen so far in these plans, it's forget the view. for this period. And what I've heard is, well, at least it'll be over quickly. I mean, it's sort of, you know, the joke about that's the old age, it doesn't last that long. So so this isn't a good thing from a viewpoint of view. And putting these, I can understand putting the tall buildings next to the freeway, and that maybe shields the noise for the other housing, and that's good. But we really have the choice here between the views and some practical solution. And I think we just got to go into it eyes wide open, and for sure don't compromise on anything that would be better done if we had the full line figured out here. I don't know. That's why I was kind of exploring what the rules are, what kind of influence we have. It doesn't look like we've got a lot of influence. If we want it, we're going to have to bend. We just have to make sure that we get as much locked up as we can. I think, you know, in general, with that said, I think, you know, option one, the Planning Commission recommendations are pretty good. But I don't, like Vice Mayor Gary, I'm not feeling comfortable that we're going to enjoy the view after this is all said and done.
Councilor Spadovsky?
All right. We had a speaker earlier start out the comment period by saying that we're early in the process. It doesn't feel like it in the graph that staff showed. It showed that we're kind of midway through the process, but I think we are very early in the process of fleshing out the details of this plan. I am also very concerned about the Scenic Corridor, but I need more information. And at least the interaction that I had with staff tonight, I feel that we are going to get more information during the next phase to make an educated decision about this project. Again, you know, looking at the Shea project initially, when they were looking for an exemption, my initial reaction was, no way, you know, it's just not going to work out. But after we saw the visual simulations and saw a more fleshed out and developed plan, it became, it began to make more and more sense for that exemption. So while I am concerned about that level of building along the freeway, I think site design, I think architecturally speaking, there are still many things that we need to look at and consider to avoid looking like the other end of the valley. I completely agree with that statement, but I think there are more factors than elevation that go into it in terms of site design and style. I think this city has a great reputation for developing and implementing specific plans. Those two necessarily don't go hand in hand. I've reviewed many specific plans from other cities throughout my career that are great in concept and have never been fleshed out. And I think with our history of developing both the South Livermore and the downtown specific plan, that we have the experience to at least tackle some of these hard issues in the next phase and move forward. I'm hopeful about BART parking, as you can probably tell from my previous comments, but I'm also concerned. Dublin, they are around the BART stations. Now they're beginning to see a lot of no BART parking signs, and I really don't want that happening here in Livermore. So I am concerned about the Sutter Street area. I think we need to pay particular attention to that residential neighborhood and maybe put in some more work as to how exactly we're going to deal with that. Also, when we talk about the Pleasanton Dublin station, if I recall correctly, and maybe we can get some clarification from staff in the next round, the Pleasanton Dublin West Station was partially funded by private development dollars. It wasn't a fully funded BART-only site or funded strictly for the BART dollars. A lot of the private development went into that station, and there was probably some consideration about design, the amount of parking. So it would be interesting to hear some of the details of how that station came into play, and that might have something to do with the design, the aesthetics. I believe that the BART connection out to Livermore is critical for our future. 580 is, we all know it's getting worse. I believe BART to Isabel is the first step in eventually going out to Greenville. I do not see a scenario, at least in the near future, where we can fully fund BART straight out to Greenville. I believe that the Isabel step is the first critical step in making that connection. And also it is a critical step in connecting to ACE, which would provide regional rail connectivity. And what that means, we need that one transfer point between the two heavy rails to get people efficiently from not only San Joaquin County, but those that travel from Modesto or Sacramento, so they have that heavy rail connection all the way through to the Bay Area. When I speak with my neighbors and residents about BART to Livermore, the few that actually say, "Oh, the heck with it," it's been so many years, they're never going to build it, and we don't need it anymore. As a Livermore resident, I don't care, I'm never going to ride it. But then when I mention that potential for the ACE connection, and then I mention it's potentially not just about BART for Livermore residents, but it's just getting the people the heck through town. It's get them along that 580 corridor and hopefully relieve some of the congestion and provide another option. Most people click with that statement. And I think we need to look at the overall goal of connecting to a regional rail system without selling our soul. And I don't believe at this point, and moving forward and possibly giving direction tonight on the alternative one with the Planning Commission suggestions, I don't believe we are selling our soul or we are committing to anything at this point. I think we do need more information. I think we need the simulations and also have a more detailed discussion about how, once this is zoned and planned, how we are actually, any guarantees that we can have that it will be built and constructed to the detail that we approve it. With that, I do want to thank all the residents that have been involved with at this point, the stakeholders, the staff, and Planning Commission. I am very impressed with the public outreach so far. That slide with the groups that have been met with was very impressive. And hopefully everybody that has interest in this project has heard about it by now, and if not, we'll hear about it in the next round, because we really do need as much public comment as possible to make a educated decision, and a decision that's what's best for Livermore in the next round. With that, I would be comfortable with recommending staff recommendations, but also I would like to add looking at increasing the affordable housing during the next phase and what impacts that would have to the project.
Okay, my turn. Staff did a phenomenal job on this. I mean, this was a big effort, and I certainly appreciate all the work that's gone into this. Like my peers up here, I think that alternative one, with the additional pedestrian bridge, the parks, I do favor the single retail center rather than splitting them to make the retail center more valuable. We do have we have a neighborhood to the north that still can't keep a grocery store, so I'd be reticent to split that up, because I want to make sure that it continues to remain viable. This is there's been a lot of talk about the urban growth boundary, and I'm recognizing that a lot of my mentors in this, the champions of the urban growth boundary, the Scenic Corridor, are not with us anymore. People like Bob Baltzer and Don Miller, Clarence Honig, and this really was something that people point to as this is why Livermore is remarkable. This is what makes us unique and makes Livermore special. That you know when you enter Livermore, because you take a breath, because you've got that open space. And I understand, in the staff report, there are triggers that if BART doesn't come, we're not going to put 10,000 people into North Livermore for a bus. And I think that was great that we understand that. And but as they say, trust everybody, but cut the cards. So I think that this, we've got Bob Allen here, and he was one of the champions on where BART was going to be. People wanted to make sure that BART was not going to adversely affect our community, specifically the downtown. But I don't think they wanted to trade the adverse impacts somewhere else. They want to make sure that this is going to fit within the community and something that the city of Livermore is going to embrace. I'm also rather nervous about the the impacts on the Scenic Corridor. I think that what we have right now is good to this point, but I think what's going to be absolutely key for community acceptance, and so that we feel more comfortable with it, is these visual simulations that we had. So we've got, Shea Holmes was here tonight, and that worked. I mean, that was something where you could actually see what that looked like, and we saw that it was actually better than what was proposed, rather than what had already been approved. And that was something that was approved 10 years ago. So I think in that regard, those are going to be something that, as we move ahead, that we get a good sense of what that's going to look like, so that we get a better opportunity to have that community conversation as far as what people are going to want. We're not going to sell our soul, as Vice Mayor Gary said. BART to ACE is going to be absolutely critical if we're going to continue to move people and goods and freight through this corridor. But unfortunately, we can't just move this project to Greenville, because Measure BB specified those funds for a BART to Isabel station. But we're working fast and furiously to get all the stars aligned to make that happen. We've got Assemblymember Baker, and we've got Congressman Swalwell, and Senator Glazer are all working together to make sure that we can get the political will and the funding to do this. And we have the regional rail working group, which is working very hard now to make sure that we get this to come to fruition. So in my conversations about BART to Livermore, one of the things I have said many times is that Livermore controls land use. BART doesn't control our land use, and the MTC doesn't control our land use. This is something over which we have control. And as all of my colleagues up here have said, we want to make sure that we get this right. And we're only going to get one shot at it. So I certainly appreciate the public's comments tonight, and the tremendous support that we have for this project, for the neighborhood, the community. But again, I just want to make sure that we get this right. And with that, I'd be willing to entertain a motion. Vice Mayor, you were starting there.
I'll try, and let me see if we can do a twofer, and if we can get consensus on a twofer. The council recommends staff pursue the next generation of design work, and alternative 1, including the pedestrian-friendly features of alternative 2. Second, staff pursue in a parallel track the Scenic Corridor visualizations and bring them back to this council for further reflective discussion prior to the project going to the Planning Commission.
And you meant to add the parks to that, right? The parks and open space.
I'm sorry. Yeah. The Planning Commission, I didn't read it off. The Planning Commission recommendation was very specific and detailed, and I saw Stephen reach for his microphone. And I'd also, no, seriously, the affordable housing component also. So I think if each one of us tonight in our positive comments appends what we need to, that's where I'm trying to get to, is that we all said, I think, positive inclusionary research things. I didn't mean to cut any of them off.
Question?
Mr. Spadowski?
So handling the next phase and the visual simulation as two different phases, if that's what I heard correctly, the visual simulation first before we say proceed with the next phase.
No, not
before, but in parallel.
And to the degree they can bring us at least first pass conceptual things, so we start to put a face on what they think the design is already shaping up to look like in terms of height and mass.
So I'm trying to understand the timing on that. That's my specific question.
So your staff would recommend that we incorporate that concept, but in a slightly different way. Our work, assuming that what we begin with is the Planning Commission recommendation to you. I've heard at least one adjustment to do exploration on affordable housing. What we would propose to do is to then essentially put all of those things into a single plan that doesn't exist yet, and then basically do full simulation work consistent with what you're familiar with, on the visual for the freeway, essentially looking to the north, I think, is your main impact, but we'll also take a look at the south or in the vicinity of your parking structure, since there will be, you've got trees that already obstruct that view, but we'll at least give you an idea of what that will look like, because you will be able to notice that parking structure. It'll be a big parking structure. The next thing that you are set up to do, both the Planning Commission and Council together, Planning Commission looking at things and making a recommendation to you, is to tell us whether we've got that preferred alternative correct. So the version that you sort of said is had the preferred alternative returning to you, getting direction, then going to the Planning Commission, then coming back to you. In this particular case, since this step really is about the visualization, I'd recommend to you that you actually allow your Planning Commission to take a look at that and make recommendations to you. For example, you might say, okay, I kind of like this, but boy, this tech hub designation, you're going to have to play with that a little bit because it's just too much of a good thing. And that's having too much of an impact on that. So I want you to play with that particular thing because now I've seen the visual simulation and it's that part that bothers us collectively. Or you might say, all right, we understand what we've got here. So my only recommendation to you is maybe having heard your direction, if it is the consensus of the council, which I heard at least 4 or 5 of you sort of saying that you had scenic corridor issues, with that direction to maybe send it to your Planning Commission after staff does the simulation, and maybe your Planning Commission will say, oops, I need 3 more views, or I need you to look at this area or that area. Understand, at least this staff person understands, that seems to be a pretty predominant policy issue that we want to have a very clear understanding about before you adopt your preferred alternative and tell us to go off and do a year's worth of analysis on it. Is that, if that's acceptable to the council, I think that would actually give you one more set of eyes. If I'm hearing your direction is, it's a big deal, Planning Commission. We want you to take a really hard look about how this looks.
And I was trying to prevent them going a little bit too far astray.
Right.
We have a good PC, and then the whole thing's rejected back to us on a singular issue that the sideboards weren't well understood. Let me ask a question of staff, because when I shaped the motion, which is still not seconded yet, so we're discussing. In the back of my mind was the timeline, which I might not have correct because it's in here, not on the screen. If the community conversation were to reach a point, or our technical conversation were to reach the point where we go, you know, if we're going to make this big a scenic exemption, we want to lock it down with a vote. We're now on the 2-year even election cycle. Wouldn't we have to have something drafted and completed by late July to the registrar to make November 16? And if we didn't make that on the planning line, our next shot is the primary or the general election in 18. So depending on your timeline to get that work you just described, Mr. Roberts, to the PC and to us, and then if the community conversation amps up in volume over the Scenic Corridor, do we then miss the timeline to BART and the regional entities because we can't have a check-in with our voters?
And it depends on what the concept is. Your staff would recommend to you that the detail work of literally, foot by foot or inch by inch on the Scenic Corridor is not the fodder for an initiative. Bluntly, that is an incredibly blunt tool. The last half a dozen projects that you actually saw in some detail here, including your outlets would have looked much more like the ones in Tracy without your ability to make some adjustments to the Scenic Corridor. So I can see some fairly dramatic pieces there. If, however, there were a version that could be crafted that allowed some level of flexibility to your successors 20 years from now to deal with a particular project without having to return to the voters, one of the questions that you might want to see is not just preliminary visualizations, but a more complete analysis in your full environmental process. You might want to actually see what you ultimately want to approve, because part of what we don't know yet, our community told us that they're concerned about the Scenic Corridor, but they're concerned about parking and traffic and circulation and all sorts of stuff where your staff may get halfway through the environmental process and this land use needs to move over here, we need to make this adjustment to that, this needs to move this way. And that's, of course, what an environmental process is supposed to do. We're supposed to figure out what the impacts are. We're supposed to solve those things for you. So I'd strongly recommend you bringing anything in an initiative prior to a complete understanding of that. And that won't be done until 17. And at that point, again, you can A, judge where the community is, B, have more complete information on visual, and C, understand sort of what your final plan needs to look like to actually function across all of the stuff, not just the scenic.
And that's logical and best practice advice. How does it answer the question, though? When does this plan have to go to the regional funders, and is it before at least a primary election in 18?
So your answer is that if you approve and part of this depends on what your purpose for going to the voters is. If your purpose to go to the voters is to lock in the adjustments and to say we're not going to make further changes, that's one standard. If you're really going to the voters to say, I don't want to approve the Isabel plan as a council, I want to approve it as a community.
No, and that's not my intent.
Okay.
My intent is a laser scalpel to the Scenic Corridor, and if the community doesn't object to the BART impacts, somehow locking in that future councils don't take it as a broad exemption to just a general plan ordinance.
So you'd be done with your work essentially in early to mid 17 by basically understanding the project, approving the final project, whatever adjustments from this preferred plan that you'll see in several months. Preferred plan will go off and study it. It'll come back essentially adjusted through that environmental process with all those mitigations on it. And then essentially BART would then be asked to take their action roughly 6 to 9 months after that, kind of depending on their schedule and how they're doing on that. They use your preferred plan as one of their inputs into their planning on that. Obviously, they're doing their full environmental document, and it's designed to trail ours by about that time frame. Timing on initiatives in 17. The only issue there is it's easiest to piggyback on even-yeared things, but the one question would be is if there is anything going on at the state level that you could piggyback initiative on. Otherwise, holding your own election is, big round
really
numbers.
Expensive.
Yeah, $250,000 to $350,000.
Again, the question is, though, does our final EIR completed plan need to go to the regional funding entities before June 18?
Yes, if you want to stay on schedule, if you want to have trains in the mid-20s, we're at 25 now. It's just time.
And again, I want to be very clear tonight because I'm the one that's done the most talking on this. In my mind, I'm fully supportive for all the reasons stated, the BART to Livermore and the jobs housing balance. I think Isabel is too tight a constrained site to be an end-of-the-line, full-featured station and make the regional planning entities 100% satisfied. And I'm, again, a representative, one of 5, and I'm just afraid that at some point the public sees 3D models and starts to think about the Scenic Corridor and has an organ rejection, and I'm trying to manage that conversation appropriately without slowing down both our and the regional planning efforts. So I'm just trying to avoid a future watch out. Been suggesting that if some of the simpler modeling visuals could be done to some degree in parallel.
Well, and in fact, our expectation and now turned into direction. So we were planning to do this, and we will actually double our efforts to make sure that you have a pretty good idea of exactly what this looks like. Is in several months, when you see your preferred plan, you will have some modeling to base that on. You'll add that third dimension, so at least you begin to get that.
That's all I'm asking for. I mean, it's as simple as one of the hotel respondents who just did some very simple, white modular. And I really appreciate
it'll be cuter than that.
Councilmember Spadowski said that the character design is a big part of this. But if the height of the buildings obliterates the ridge for X tenths, of a mile, I just want to have that be part of the very transparent conversation. And if it doesn't obliterate the ridge, then that's a different conversation.
You'll have that information before we ask you to approve a preferred plan, and that's at the front end of your environmental process, and then you'll have a year after that before you lock it in with a final approval.
I have a related question I forgot to ask, it just occurs to me. So I'm coming to the point of view that we're not going to see ridge there. But one of the things I forgot to ask is in option alternative 1, the tech hub is right against the freeway. At every other place that we've done, the outlets, everything else, there's a buffer zone. So what's driving these tall buildings right next to the freeway? I mean, it's the only place that's going to be really in your face. So why don't we have some kind of green buffer? Why does it have to be so right there?
And essentially, as you see there, we have some circulation in front. So I think one of the things that, we need to take a look at is, do we have the designation on the ground in the right spot? So if it is the pleasure of the council, we'll certainly take a look at not only the question of, so obviously placing purple all the way out to the property line gives one the impression that I have a 6-story building 6 inches off the curb. So I think we need to translate the purple on the ground into what the actual complex would look like, build it for you, and then take a look. And then when we do that, that can be an iterative process, which is, that was the first pass. What happens if we shove and push this around a little bit? What happens if we play a little bit with exactly how that designation is on the ground? So what I'm hearing from you all is that's where you'd like us to spend some time and effort with the visual simulations and bluntly the land use to sort of make sure that we have dealt with that piece very sensitively.
Right. So what I'm saying is the visual simulation, I'm not optimistic we're going to see the hills.
Fair enough.
But I don't need to see a wall.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the problem of that BART station over on the west end. It's just right there, right? So I don't know that we have, I guess my preference, I don't know where everybody else is, but I see no need to put a building right next to the freeway without a landscaping buffer where you can put some tall trees.
Fair enough.
Just a point of clarification with that. Typically, would we actually designate it as a landscape parcel, or would we put a landscape easement on top of the purple to create that buffer?
Well, technically what you'd do is you'd have your specific plan actually do design standards and setbacks.
Right.
And that's a step further,
right.
But your staff is getting the sense that in this one particular area, we might want to take a look at, exactly what is the distance from the freeway? Exactly what are the floor area ratios? And then there's one thing, and you can even see it in the valley here, is when you do go vertical, you generally have some area around the buildings. That difference, when I have a 1-story building, it covers a huge portion of the property. When I have a 4-story building, it's a much smaller percentage of the property. But let us play with that both from a development standard standpoint and from a visual simulation standpoint. Come and get some feedback from you, and then we'll go off and play with it some more.
And what I'm thinking of is, Bishop Ranch, that one office building, 10,000 people in that one building. But you don't see it from the freeway, right, particularly. And then the other places, right? So it's possible to have a very impactful office complex, right? San Ramon, from that point of view and visually, they can do it. So I guess the question is, why can't we do it?
Because of the landform sloping northerly from just back of the freeway.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is, there's a way around it,
right? And buried in the staff report that I know we all really read, and it's hard to regurgitate almost 400 pages in the conversation, was the current residential mid-density homeowners saying, don't back a tall building up against us, because when we look south from the condos and the townhomes, we don't want to look into a slab of a building. So you got rising land, homeowners saying, don't wall me in, and it squishes back down towards the freeway where the landform is.
Right. All the more reasons why this is not the ideal thing.
You're starting to solve your staff's challenges here. I appreciate that. We can bring you into the office, work on it. But essentially, you've given extremely clear direction about what your concern is, essentially a wall-like effect, things that are contiguous and solid, things that completely obliterate the view for a significant period of time. And you'd like us to both model that and perhaps provide some options, if there are any, that might lessen that impact. And if there isn't anything at all we can do on that front, to be simply very clear about what those impacts are so that you can make an informed decision. We've got our marching orders on that one. We get where you're trying to go on it.
So can I make a simple motion, hit the erase button and try over? Just my original motion. without the attachments. Just for staff to continue at best pace with incorporating all the positives they heard tonight, unless somebody right now in a discussion says, I want to take something off the table. I think we all had collective positive feedback. Consider, move forward with alternative 1 with the open space pedestrian inclusions of alternative 2, and study the specific issues that raised, such as Scenic Corridor and inclusionary housing, and get back to us at appropriate check-in points, so you don't let the formal process get out ahead of us and the community as we go through this sensitive issue.
And
but the motion's just alternative A with the inclusions. Proceed given with what you've heard.
And if you mean by positive constructive, then I go with that. Not just reaffirming that we love something, but it's constructive feedback.
Okay, so we have a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, seconded by motion by Vice Mayor Gary, seconded by Councilmember Warner. Any further discussion? Any other questions, comments?
And we're making sure to include the Planning Commission recommendations as well.
Yes.
That was
yes.
part of it.
I'm
Okay, just
sorry.
making sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
All of the Planning Commission recommendations, inclusive of the 2 alternatives, with the other inclusions you heard from council tonight on Scenic Corridor, inclusionary housing, parking. We all had some good observations, and most of us said ditto to, oh yeah, that's a good one. Oh yeah, that's a good one.
The city clerk has the tape.
Yes, she does.
So trying to think of another thing to include, so you would say that all over again, trying to force you to say it a third time.
No.
That's okay. No.
Any other comments on the motion?
No.
Okay. Comments? Okay. Call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Do you have enough excruciating direction there, Mr. City Manager?
I think we've got it, and you'll let us know when we come back in front of you in a few months. We
And staff hasn't run from the table. So again, I really appreciate the tremendous amount of work and effort that you put into this. So I understand that we recognize the great effort that you've done. So with that, we adjourn to the March 14th meeting, 7 o'clock here at the council chambers. Thank you very much.